Chapter 1. In the middle of a vast mountain range, two sword-shaped peaks stood 100 meters apart from each other under the sea of clouds. These two sword-shaped peaks were very steep and looked like two magnified swords inserted into the ground. There was no place to climb. The top of these two sword-shaped peaks was less than 100 meters away from the sea of clouds. At the top of the peaks, there was a faint mist lingering around. Under the cover of the mist, the scenery at the top of the peaks was blurry and hazy. However, one could still vaguely see that at the top of the two sword-shaped peaks, there were two people standing there quietly like stone statues. They were motionless and only the wind in the sky blew their clothes and hair. Among the two, one of them looked like a young man in his 20s. The young man was very handsome. His handsome facial features were flawless and could be said to be unparalleled in the world. He was simply the killer of all the young girls in the world. His pair of ordinary eyes had a unique attraction. It was very charming, as if it could capture one's soul. The young man had long black hair that reached his waist. His long hair was not tied and was casually draped behind his back. It fluttered with the whistling wind. On the young man's back, there was a long sword wrapped in a thick layer of white cloth. Only the exquisite sword hilt could be seen. On the sword hilt, the two words, Qingfeng, were clearly engraved. But what was strange was that the sword was not tied to the young man's back. It was as if the sword was attached to the young man's back and did not fall off. This scene was very difficult to understand. The young man's name was Jian Qin, and he was the most famous expert in the Jianghu. He was also known as the Sword God, a grandmaster of the sword. His swift sword had already reached perfection, and he had reached the peak of perfection. However, he was only in his 20s. The people of Jianghu knew very little about Jianqin. Other than knowing that he was an orphan and did not belong to any sect, they knew nothing about him. His origin was like a ball of mystery. No one knew where he learned his powerful martial arts and exquisite swordsmanship. On the sword-shaped peak 100 meters away from Jianqin, a tall man in a black robe stood facing him. He was an old man who looked to be in his 50s or 60s. He had white hair and a youthful complexion. His pair of old eyes were bright and piercing. His gaze was as sharp as a sword and no one dared to look him in the eye. In his hand was a thick black greatsword. Strangely, the greatsword did not have an edge. This old man was a legendary figure who had disappeared from Jianghu for more than 100 years. Duguqiubai. Duguqiubai was only his title. No one knew his real name and identity. This was because he was already an invincible super expert 100 years ago. There were very few people who still knew some information about Duguqiubai in the world. Even so, his incomparable glory was still passed down from generation to generation. 100 years later, his strength was even greater than before. No one knew how strong Duguqiubai was now. Duguqiubai silently stared at Jianqin, who seemed to be in his 20s, 100 meters away. His gaze was extremely sharp as a blade. A cold glint flashed through his eyes from time to time. Jianqin, you're no weaker than the old man at such a young age. Your attainments in the way of the sword have reached a height that even the old man cannot compare to. It's a pity that you killed my only beloved disciple. I have to avenge him today no matter what, Duguqiubai said solemnly. Duguqiubai said in a deep voice. His seemingly calm tone was filled with a chilling killing intent. Jianqin's expression was extremely calm as he stared at Duguqiubai. His white robes fluttered in the wind, and his waist-length hair danced wildly in the wind. He looked very dashing. You can't blame me for this. It was your disciple who offended me first. As for dying to my sword, he can only blame himself for not being skilled enough. Jianqin's lips parted slightly as he nonchalantly said. Duguqiubai was so angry that he laughed. Good. What a not skilled enough. Let's see how strong you are today. Let's see if you can kill the old man with that breeze sword of yours. As he said that, Duguqiubai waved the black iron heavy sword in his hand. Suddenly, a powerful sword chi shot out from the sword and shot towards Jianqin, who was 100 meters away. Jianqin's expression was calm. Following the sound of a sword being unsheathed, the long sword on his back appeared in Jianqin's hand. The sword was 4 feet long and 2 fingers wide, and it emitted a silver-white glow. Following that, Jianshan stabbed out with the long sword in his hand. A powerful sword chi shot out from the sword at a speed that could not be seen with the naked eye. Boom! When the two sword chis collided, a deafening boom rang out. The powerful true energy shockwaves spread out in all directions from the point of explosion, dispersing the faint mist that lingered in the surroundings. Following that, Jianshan and Duguqiubai flew up at the same time, leaving the mountain they were standing on. They flew between two mountains and engaged in an intense battle in midair. The two of them attacked at an incredibly fast speed, and the clashing and scraping sounds of weapons rang out ceaselessly in the air. Strong sword beams shot out from the two of them in a disorderly manner, creating large holes on the surrounding mountains and sending countless rocks down to the ground, thousands of zhang below. In just a few breaths' time, Jianshan and Duguqiubai had exchanged hundreds of blows. When they landed on the two mountains again, both of them were in a sorry state. Their previously intact clothes were torn and tattered. Duguqiubai looked at Jianshan with a serious expression. He said in a deep voice, "What a fast sword. No wonder no one in the Jianghu can break your fast sword technique, but you still can't do anything to old man." Duguqiubai paused for a moment before continuing. "It'll be hard to determine the winner if we continue fighting like this. Why don't we use our strongest attacks at the same time? We'll decide the winner in one move." With that, Duguqiubai's chi suddenly soared. It was like a huge sword piercing through the clouds. Jianshan's expression became serious. Following that, he also released an extremely powerful chi that was no weaker than Duguqiubai's. Their auras continued to rise, blotting out the sky and filling up the entire sky. When their auras combined, they enveloped the entire mountain for thousands of li. Even the clouds in the sky were pierced by their auras and quickly dissipated. Fierce winds howled in the sky, producing ear-piercing cries of ghosts and howls of wolves. Within the mountain forest, countless birds and beasts cried out in fear. They quickly fled into the distance. Meanwhile, the auras of the two men on the mountain peak continued to grow stronger. They were preparing for their strongest attack. Crack, crack. In the forest not far away, many small trees could not withstand the powerful chi of the two people and snapped at the waist. They were then sent flying into the sky by the powerful chi of the two people. As Jianshan and Duguqiubai's chi continued to soar, a powerful chi appeared around their bodies. It spun rapidly around the two of them. The flowers and trees were bent under the pressure of the chi of the two people. Countless trees swayed unsteadily. At the same time, Jianshan's light wind sword and Duguqiubai's dark iron heavy sword were both emitting a dazzling white light and a dark black light. The chi of the two people became stronger and stronger. In the end, Jianshan's entire body was covered in a thick layer of white light while Duguqiubai was covered in a layer of black light. The two people's figures were completely lost. Only two balls of dazzling light of opposite colors could be seen in the sky. The long sword in Jianshan's hand trembled lightly. At this moment, the long sword was shining with a dazzling sword light. The powerful sword chi was enough to make one's heart tremble. His long black hair danced wildly in the wind. His white robe also fluttered in the wind. His entire body was suspended in the air. He looked like a god of war, mighty and undefeatable. When their imposing auras rose to the peak, both of them suddenly let out a furious roar that shook the heavens at the same time. Their voices shook the heavens, and it was like a deafening clap of thunder. After that, a gorgeous white light and an extremely dark black light collided with each other at the speed of lightning, and they passed each other in an instant. There was no sound of collision as expected. When everything calmed down, Jianshan and Duguqiubai had already switched places. They were now standing 100 meters apart on top of two mountains. Both of their faces were extremely pale. Fresh blood quickly flowed out of Jianshan's chest, dyeing his white robe red. When the two of them passed each other at lightning speed, Duguqiubai's sword had already pierced through his heart. As for Jianshan, he had already lost his entire right arm. Without his right arm, he no longer had the strength to hold his sword. The dark iron heavy sword in his right hand had already fallen down the cliff. When he pierced through Jianshan's heart, He also lost an arm. Jianshan quietly stood on top of the mountain. A trace of blood slowly flowed out of his mouth. His complexion became paler and paler. In just a short moment he was as pale as a sheet of paper. His heart was pierced through by Dugu Qiubai's sword. He was in a hopeless situation where death was certain. Haha. Suddenly, Zhu Qiubai burst into laughter on the opposite mountain. Jianshan, with your talent, given a few more years, old man would definitely be no match for you. What a pity, even though you aren't much weaker than the old man right now, you still lost to him in the end. Having said that, Dugu Qiubai sighed. It's indeed a pity that a genius of a generation will die in the hands of the old man. However, the old man had no choice but to do this in order to avenge his disciple. Jianshan slowly closed his eyes as he sensed his life slipping away. He seemed very calm at this moment. Perhaps life and death didn't matter much to him. After all, Jianshan had killed many people during his years of wandering the world. His only regret was that he wouldn't have the chance to explore the pinnacle of the Tao of the sword in the future. While Jianshan was immersed in this emotionless state, a strange feeling suddenly appeared in his mind. At this crucial moment, Jianshan's soul seemed to have fused with the sword in his hand. He was the sword and the sword was him. There was no distinction between him and the sword. It was as if the sword in his hand had become a part of his soul. At the same time, strands of pure and powerful worldly energy descended from the heaven and earth. They flowed into Jianshan's head and perfectly fused with his soul. Jianshan could clearly feel his soul growing at an unbelievable speed. At the same time, his soul seemed to have left his body and flown into the endless wilderness. At this moment, Jianshan could see everything within 10 miles clearly in his mind. He could even sense the movements of the mosquitoes on the ground. Chapter 2. Suddenly, the long sword in Jianshan's hand broke free from Jianshan's control. At this moment, the long sword seemed to have become a sentient immortal sword. It turned into a beam of light and shot toward Dugu Qiubai, who was 100 meters away at lightning speed. The long sword was incredibly fast. Before Dugu Qiubai could react, the long sword had already reached his throat. Then, with a strong sword aura, it pierced through his throat under Dugu Qiubai's horrified gaze. Afterward, the long sword circled around in the air and flew back to Jianshan's hand. A fist-sized hole appeared on Dugu Qiubai's throat. Even though Jianshan's long sword was very thin, the sword aura around it still expanded the wound to the size of a fist. Dugu Qiubai's eyes widened as he stared at the long sword that had returned to Jianshan's hand. His face was filled with disbelief as if he had seen the most unbelievable thing in the world. He opened his mouth slightly as if he wanted to say something. Unfortunately, his throat had been pierced and he could no longer speak. In the end, he slowly fell to the ground with a face full of unwillingness and shock. Jianshan held the long sword in his hand as he silently watched Dugu Qiubai fall to the ground before him. He sighed inwardly. He did not expect that he would make another breakthrough at the last moment and reach the realm of wielding a sword with his spirit. However, he was not far from death now. Jianshan's eyes gradually dimmed. Even though he had made another breakthrough, he could not escape death. After all, his heart had been pierced through by Dugu Qiubai's sword. Then, Jianshan followed in Dugu Qiubai's footsteps and slowly fell to the ground. The moment Jianshan collapsed, the two sword-shaped mountains that he and Dugu Qiubai stood on suddenly exploded. Countless rocks shot out in all directions as violet and azure light filled the sky, illuminating the surroundings. At that moment, the entire sky was filled with violet and azure light. Unfortunately, Jianshan and Dugu Qiubai had no way of knowing what happened next. In a spacious and luxurious mansion, there was a large group of people gathered in front of a door. The person in front was a young man. He paced back and forth in front of the door. There was an indescribable anxiety and worry on his face. The young man was around 30 years old. He had a dignified appearance. Although he was nearing middle age, he still couldn't hide the handsomeness on his face. He wore a white robe embroidered with golden silk. He had the aura of a superior person. His face was resolute, and his eyebrows were tightly furrowed into a ball. 3 meters away from the door, There was a group of about 30 people standing there with worried expressions. There were both young and old among them. The older ones seemed to be in their 60s or 70s. They had a head full of white hair and a face full of wrinkles. Even so, their eyes flickered with a frightening light. From the light in their eyes, one would think that they were not old men at all. Instead, they were strong and vigorous middle-aged men. Most of the others were middle-aged men in their 30s or 40s. They all had imposing appearances and sharp eyes. One could tell at a glance that they were not ordinary people. In the room opposite them, the painful moans of a woman could be heard constantly. "Madam, push harder, push harder. She's going to come out soon, she's going to come out soon." A rather urgent voice soon rang out. The voice was rather old. One could tell with a single sound that the owner of the voice was not young and was a woman. Outside the door, the middle-aged man who was anxiously pacing back and forth in front of the door suddenly stopped. He anxiously said, "Sai, it's been an entire day and night. Why hasn't Yun been born yet? If this drags on, I'm afraid it will be detrimental to Yun." The young man's voice was filled with worry. He was clearly very worried. "Patriarch, don't worry. Madam Yun will definitely be fine. Don't forget that Madam Yun is a radiant saint master." An old man with a head full of white hair and a face full of wrinkles persuaded. Although his tone was filled with confidence, he still could not hide the worry on his face. "Sigh." The white-robed young man with the temperament of a superior heaved a heavy sigh again. The anxiety and worry on his face did not lessen in the slightest. Afterwards, the group of people waited outside the room for over 4 hours. Finally, an excited voice rang out from the room. "Patriarch, Patriarch, Madam Yun has given birth. Madam Yun has given birth. The mother and child are safe. It's a boy." The voice was filled with excitement. Hearing this, the worried look on the face of the young man who was waiting anxiously outside the door was finally swept away. Instead, it was replaced by a face full of excitement and excitement. Then, without saying anything, he directly pushed open the door and disappeared in a flash. His speed was really unbelievably fast. It was definitely not an ability that an ordinary person could have. The young man immediately arrived before a large bed in the room. He sat beside the bed and stared at the woman on the bed in concern. He said, "How are you? Are you fine?" His voice was gentle and filled with concern. The one lying on the bed was a young woman in her 20s. She was so beautiful that she could cause the downfall of a nation. She was simply a heavenly beauty. Her beautiful face was already dripping with fragrant sweat. Her complexion was slightly pale, and she looked exhausted. The woman looked at the young man with exhaustion. She smiled and said, "Husband, I'm fine. Let me see our child." All right. As long as Yun is fine." The young man smiled happily. He then turned to look at the midwife who was holding the child. Just as he was about to speak, he noticed that the midwife's brows were tightly knitted together. She stared strangely at the baby in his arms. She fiddled with the baby as she muttered, "Cry, cry. Child, why aren't you crying? That's strange. I've been a midwife for so long and I've given birth to at least a few hundred, if not 1,000. This is the first time I've seen a child who hasn't cried as soon as he was born." At this time, the group of people outside also entered the room. Each of them had a smile on their faces as they congratulated the woman lying on the bed. The middle-aged man smiled happily and gently said to the woman on the bed, "Yun, lie down for a while. I'll bring the child over." Then, the young man got up and walked over to the midwife. He asked, "What's going on? Is there something wrong with the child?" The young man's voice sank slightly. Some children would be born with an innate emergency. This was a very common occurrence and it had happened quite a few times. He was really afraid that something had happened to his child. Hearing this, the midwife looked bitter. She looked at the young man and said respectfully, "Master, I don't know if there's anything wrong with the young master. However, based on my decades of experience in midwifery, every child cries as soon as they're born. However, your young master's situation is a little different. Look, he hasn't cried at all as soon as he was born. This is very strange." Hearing this, The young man frowned and looked at the baby in the midwife's arms. He saw that the baby's large, bright, and pure eyes were looking around. He would stare here and there for a moment. He was very adorable. It seemed that there was nothing wrong with him. However, he did not notice that in the depths of the baby's bright and clear eyes, there was deep shock and disbelief. Afterwards, the young man placed his hand on the baby and a hazy, earthen yellow light suddenly appeared on his hand. The midwife became slightly uneasy when she saw the young man's actions. She was only a lowly midwife, someone who lived at the bottom of society. She really was afraid that there was something wrong with the baby in her arms. Otherwise, if the young man blamed her, she would not be able to bear the consequences. Even though this matter had nothing to do with her, she had no ability to explain herself. The young man pulled his hand back very quickly and finally relaxed. He smiled happily and said, "The child is fine. There's nothing wrong with him at all." With that, the young man took the baby from the midwife. The midwife immediately let out a sigh of relief when she heard that. She finally relaxed and smiled happily. "Master is right. Perhaps this represents the young master's extraordinariness. The young master will definitely become a supreme expert in the future." The young man could not help but laugh aloud when he heard the midwife's words, even though he knew that the chances were extremely slim. He said, Good, good, good. Let's hope that's the case. Someone, tip Mother Hong 100 gold coins." The midwife was overjoyed when she heard that. She immediately said excitedly, "Thank you for your reward, master. Thank you for your reward." The young man carried the baby over to the woman on the bed and said happily, "Yun, oh look. This is our child. He's so cute." The woman called Yun, hugged the baby and kissed his cheek affectionately. She said happily, "Husband, since the child is a boy, let's call him Changyang Shoten according to our previous agreement." The young man laughed aloud. "That's right. I'll officially call him Changyang Shoten now. Someone, invite all the esteemed guests in Lore City. I'll hold a banquet in Changyang Prefecture tomorrow to celebrate." In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. In front of a small lake in a large courtyard, a boy less than a meter tall stood there in a daze. His eyes stared at the fake mountain in the center of the lake in a daze. The boy wore luxurious clothes, and his expression was extremely complicated. For a boy less than 3 years old to have such an expression, he seemed rather out of the ordinary. Chapter 3. Changyang Shoten looked at his small body and sighed inside. His face was filled with mixed feelings. In the past year, who knew how many times these scenes had appeared in his head? Now that he thought about it, it felt like it had just happened yesterday. The memories were so clear, as if they had been deeply imprinted in the depths of his soul. He could not forget them no matter what. Now, he understood that his past life was Genshin. After his death, he had mysteriously reincarnated with his soul and memories. As Genshin had retained the memories of his past life as soon as he was born, he learned the language of this place soon after he was born. Afterwards, he gained a rough understanding of what kind of existence his family was from the conversations of the people around him. At the same time, he also gained a rough understanding that this world was not the world he had originally lived in, but a completely new world. It was a world that Genshin had never heard of before. The huge estate that Genshin resided in was called Changyang Prefecture. Changyang Prefecture was one of the 4 great clans of Lore City. It held an important position in the entire city. His father was the patriarch of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang Ba. His mother was called by Yuntian. She was the 4th concubine of the patriarch of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang Ba. She was not the main wife. However, his mother's status in Changyang Prefecture was not low because she was a Radiant Saint Master. Although Genshin did not know what a Radiant Saint Master was, he did know that his mother's status in Changyang Prefecture was extremely high because of her identity as a Radiant Saint Master. She was respected by many people. Genshin himself was the 4th young master of Changyang Prefecture. He possessed an extremely high status. Above Genshin, there were 2 older brothers and 1 older sister. They were Changyang Hu, Changyang Mingyue, and Changyang Ku. They were all born of the same father as Genshin. Apart from Changyang Hu, Jianshan had seen his sister Changyang Mingyue and his third brother Changyang Ku a few times. They were all only a few years older than Jianshan. His second sister, who was the oldest, just happened to be 4 years old, 3 years older than Jianshan. His third brother, Changyang Ku, was 2 years older than Jianshan. He just happened to be 3 years old this year. Apart from them, there were many children who were direct descendants of Changyang Prefecture. At this moment, an old man dressed as a caretaker arrived behind Jianshan. He said with a rather gentle voice, "Fourth young master, it's getting late. Madam wants you to return." Only with that did Jianshan return to his senses. Looking at the sky, he suddenly discovered that it was already misty. It was a sign that night was about to arrive. Unknowingly, Jianshan had already stood there for an entire afternoon. Jianshan nodded slightly. "I understand." Changbo, "I'll return immediately." The person Jianshan called Changbo was the caretaker of Changyang Prefecture. Almost everything in Changyang Prefecture was taken care of by him. His status in Changyang Prefecture was not low. Even though Changbo was only a caretaker, he did not show any respect to anyone in Changyang Prefecture. His status was basically on the same level as Changyang Ba, the head of the family in Changyang Prefecture. A smile appeared on Changbo's face. He looked at Jianshan with a glimmer of hope. Jianshan was able to walk on the ground without the support of others when he was less than half a year old. He could even speak in the 8th month. Moreover, his pronunciation was clear. He was already able to communicate normally with others. Just based on these 2 points, Jianshan was already vaguely known as a genius in Changyang Prefecture. At present, he had already become the person with the highest status in the middle stage of Changyang Prefecture. At night, Jianshan accompanied his mother, Bai Yuntian, to the dining hall for dinner. The dining hall they used was a special one. Only the head of the family in Changyang Prefecture, his children, and a few concubines could use it. When Jianshan and Bai Yuntian arrived at the dining hall, there were already 3 beautiful women in their 20s sitting at the round table. Aside from them, there were 2 children, 1 boy and 1 girl, who did not look much older than Jianshan. The boy looked to be around 3 or 4 years old. He was white and chubby. At the moment, he was sitting quietly on the bench. He was the 3rd son of the head of the family in Changyang Prefecture, as well as the 3rd young master of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang Ku. As soon as he saw Jianshan enter, Changyang Ku's small eyes were filled with hostility and provocation. It was very obvious that he had some prejudice against Jianshan. Although the 4 women, including Jianshan's mother, could see the hostility in Changyang Ku's eyes towards Jianshan, the 4 of them did not care. In their eyes, this was just a child's play. It was not a big deal at all. The other little girl looked to be about 4 or 5 years old. She had 2 small braids on her head, and her bright eyes were filled with a strange spirit. She had 2 small dimples on her shallow smile, and she looked very cute. Just from her appearance when she was young, it was almost certain that when she grew up, she would definitely be a great beauty with a face that could cause the downfall of a city or country. She was the 2nd child of the head of the family in Changyang Prefecture. At the same time, she was the 2nd young miss of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang Mingyue. She was the only daughter of the head of the family in Changyang Prefecture. "4th brother, you've come. Come sit." Changyang Mingyue's faint smile became even brighter when she saw Jianshan enter. She quickly waved her hand and greeted him. Jianshan nodded at Changyang Mingyue as a greeting. He then followed his mother to the 2 empty seats at the round table. Jianshan's mother, Bai Yuntian, looked at Jianshan dotingly and said softly, quickly greet your aunts, 2nd sister, and 3rd brother." Jianshan was helpless. He looked at the delicate women and said, "Greetings 1st aunts, 2nd aunts, 3rd aunts, 2nd sister, and 3rd brother." Ever since she found out that Jianshan had learned how to speak, his mother, Bai Yuntian, had been overjoyed. She had also dragged Jianshan to learn some basic etiquette. Jianshan, on the other hand, did not resist his mother's suggestion. He also knew that he would grow up in this new world in the future. When he first arrived here, Jianshan had an intense struggle over his identity. After all, he had reincarnated from his previous life. Since he had retained the memories of his previous life, he was still Jianchen. As for his current identity, Jianchen had rejected it a little. However, as time passed, he gradually accepted his current identity. No matter what, Bai Yuntian was still his mother. Although he had mysteriously retained the memories of his previous life after his death, those memories had occurred in another world. They had nothing to do with this world. Now, Jianchen had hidden his past deep in his mind. He planned to accept everything here with an open heart. The three women smiled at Jianchen. One of them, who was dressed in luxurious yellow clothes, smiled and said, "Sister Yun, Xianxia is becoming more and more sensible. It's really hard to imagine that he's just a one-year-old child. I really envy you for having such a smart son." The woman in luxurious yellow clothes was the second wife of the patriarch of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang Ba. She was Bai Yushuang, Changyang Minyue's mother. "That's right, Sister Yun. Second sister is right. I found that I like Xiangtian more and more." The woman sitting beside Jianchen also smiled. Although she said that, her gaze towards Jianchen was calm. She was the third wife of the patriarch of Changyang Prefecture, Yu Fengyan. Xiangtian is indeed the most talented child I've ever seen. He could walk by himself when he was half a year old, and he could speak when he was 8 months old. This is something that no other child of his age can do. I really look forward to the test of Saint Force and potential when Xiangtian turns 3. I hope that he can give us all a surprise then. The woman who spoke was slightly older. She gave off a noble aura. She was the first wife of the patriarch of Changyang Prefecture. Her name was Ling Long. As soon as Ling Long finished speaking, a deep male voice suddenly rang out, "That's right. I also look forward to the test of Saint Force when turns 3. I hope that he can give us all a surprise." With that, a young man who was close to 30 walked into the dining hall. The young man gave off an aura of superiority. He wore a white robe with golden edges, and his long black hair casually draped over his shoulders. He gave off a very ethereal feeling. Husband. Father. As soon as they saw the young man, the 7 people sitting at the dining table stood up at the same time and greeted him. Jianchen was no exception as he greeted him softly. This young man was the patriarch of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang Ba. Changyang Ba went straight to an empty seat at the dining table and sat down. With a gentle smile on his face, he looked at Jianchen and said softly, "Xiang, are you happy in the residence?" Jianchen nodded slightly and said, "Not bad." Changyang Ba continued with a smile on his face, "Xiang, if you feel bored in the residence, you can go out and relax. You can also see the outside world." "Yes, father," Jianchen said softly. Seeing that Jianchen was so sensible, not at all like a one-year-old child, Changyang Ba felt an indescribable joy in his heart. The family had a joyous dinner and the meal was quickly finished. After the meal, Jianchen returned to his room alone. According to his age, he should have slept with his mother, Bai Yuntian, but Jianchen took the initiative to ask for a room to himself. Regarding this issue, Jianchen was very firm. In the end, his mother could not persuade him and could only helplessly agree. At night, Jianchen sat cross-legged on his bed. His hands were steadily placed on his knees with his palms facing the sky. He was silently practicing the first level of the Azulite Sword Codex. The Azulite Sword Codex was the greatest bargaining chip that allowed Jianchen to roam the Jianghu at the young age of 20. This was a secret cultivation technique. Not only did it record a very profound mental cultivation technique, it also contained some powerful sword moves. This Azulite Sword Codex was discovered when Jianchen was playing in the mountains. He accidentally fell into a pool of water below a cliff and did not die. After waking up, he found it in a cave. Afterwards, he ate fish every day. After 10 years, Jianchen was able to fly up from the bottom of the cliff and return to the surface. Jianchen was originally an orphan. His parents had both died during the war. When he was young, he was adopted by a kind old man. When he left the cliff, 10 years had already passed. When he returned to the small village, his adoptive grandfather had already passed away many years ago. In the end, Jianchen, who had no one to rely on, paid his respects to his adoptive grandfather and left the small village to roam the Jianghu alone. Ever since Jianshan accepted this world and his current identity, he began to practice the Azulate Sword Codex. He had already been practicing for half a year now. Chapter 4. The Azulate Sword Codex had a total of 12 levels, one of which was to refine the body. In order to have powerful martial arts, one must first have a strong body. After all martial arts relied on the body to perform. Therefore, the first level of the Azulate Sword Codex was to refine the body. Most of the martial artists in Jianghu relied on training and doing some forced movements to strengthen their physique. Some people even had large bulging muscles, making the muscles all over their body clear and visible to the naked eye. Some people's bodies were even as hard as steel and iron. In Jianshan's opinion, this kind of physical training method was no different from destroying one's own body. It was simply suppressing one's body function. Although this would make one's physical strength far beyond that of ordinary people, it would also cause great harm to one's body. This kind of person's lifespan was often very short, especially when they entered the old age. A series of problems would appear on their body. Among the martial artists in the Jianghu, there were some people and sects that had their own methods of tempering the body. However, in Jianshan's opinion, these methods were all unorthodox. They didn't walk the correct path at all. Even the Shaolin Temple's tendon-changing scripture was no exception. Although the I Ching scripture was a dual cultivation of both internal and external, it could train one's inner strength internally and externally. It could train one's skin, flesh, tendons, and bones externally. However, the information recorded in the I Ching scripture about training one's skin, flesh, tendons, and bones had yet to go deep into the bone marrow. In Jianshan's opinion, the I Ching scripture could only train the skin, flesh, and bones on the surface of the human body. It did not achieve the true effect of training one's body at all. The body refining method recorded in the Azulate Sword Codex was a very profound and mysterious method. It focused on absorbing the qi of heaven and earth and then transforming it into the bone marrow of the body. This would strengthen every part of the body, every cell, and even the internal organs of the body. Not only would this have a very good body refining effect, it would also bring endless benefits to the body. It could greatly extend one's lifespan. Moreover, in the later stages of the cultivation, one's body would become stronger along with their inner strength. The Azulate Sword Codex also indicated that if one could cultivate the body refining method to the highest level, they could even live as long as the heavens and earth. However, the body refining method was related to one's own strength. Only when one's inner qi was stronger could one's body become stronger. After all, the body refining method recorded in the Azulate Sword Codex required one's inner qi to be integrated into the body. Once the inner qi and the strength of the body reached a balance, one would have to break this balance as quickly as possible and work hard to increase the strength of the inner qi. Only then would one's body be strengthened one step further. The qi of heaven and earth was endlessly absorbed by Jianshan. It circulated through the meridians in his body according to a specific cycle. Then, under Jianshan's control, it was integrated into every cell and internal organ in his body. Ever since he came to this foreign world, the only thing that made Jianshan excited was the qi of heaven and earth here. The qi of heaven and earth here was extremely dense, more than 100 times denser than the world he had lived in before. Compared to this place, the world he had lived in before was undoubtedly a poor and destitute place. It was like heaven and hell. The two could not be compared at all. This was the only thing that made Jianshan happy. However, what made Jianshan puzzled was that the qi of heaven and earth in this world was roughly the same as the qi of heaven and earth in his previous life. However, Jianshan carefully discovered that the qi of heaven and earth in this world had a special energy. This energy only took up a small portion of the qi of heaven and earth, and it was closely connected to the qi of heaven and earth. It was as if the two were one and could not be separated. When this energy was absorbed into his body, it did not cause any discomfort. Therefore, Jianshan did not exclude this special energy that was obviously different from the qi of heaven and earth. However, Jianshan was extremely curious about this energy as well. A thought constantly circled through his head, which was that this energy was definitely not as simple as it seemed. As the converted qi of heaven and earth continuously integrated into his body, Jianshan also very clearly felt that every cell in his body, as well as the 8 extraordinary meridians and internal organs in his body, were constantly strengthening. This converted qi of heaven and earth was like a great tonic for them. They all seemed to have come alive and were desperately absorbing the qi of heaven and earth, like hungry tigers. At the same time, Jianshan also felt extremely comfortable from head to toe. There was an indescribable feeling of comfort that made him feel as if he was floating. In the blink of an eye, another year had passed. Now, Jianshan had been in this foreign world for 2 whole years. In these 2 years, Jianshan did not take a single step out of Changyang Prefecture. He spent all his free time in his room, cultivating the first level of the Azulate Sword mantra, body refinement. Perhaps it was because the qi of heaven and earth here was 100 times denser than the world of his previous life, but Jianshan had achieved great results in the past year. Now, Jianshan did not doubt that a normal weapon in the hands of an ordinary person would not be able to harm him at all. It would not even be able to pierce through the outermost layer of his skin. Of course, this was only Jianshan's feeling. He would not foolishly try it out just because of this. In this year, Jianshan's body had also developed at an unbelievable speed. He was only 2 years old, but he was already 1.2 meters tall. He did not look like a 2-year-old child at all. Instead, he looked more like a 5 or 6-year-old child. This scene made everyone in Changyang Prefecture very surprised. Almost everyone had high hopes for Jianshan. They hoped that he was really a genius with limitless potential. However, all of this could only be confirmed when he was 3 years old. Regarding all of this, Jianshan felt very helpless. He did not know if his body grew so fast because he cultivated the body refining technique of the Azulate Sword Codex. This was because in his previous life, he had not come into contact with the Azulate Sword Codex at this age. After Jianshan accompanied his mother to the dining hall for dinner, he still habitually locked himself in his room. He locked the door and sat cross-legged on the bed. His hands were on his knees and his eyes were closed. He was in a posture of facing the sky. However, at this time, Jianshan was not cultivating. Instead, he was thinking. He had already been in this world for 2 years. In these 2 years, Jianshan had not taken a single step out of Changyang Prefecture. He spent most of his time cultivating in his room. Until now, his understanding of this world was still too little. It could be said that other than Changyang Prefecture, he did not know what kind of world this was. He did not even know what the outside world was like. He was also very clear in his heart that he was only a 2-year-old child in the eyes of others. A 2-year-old child would usually be happily in the arms of their parents. They would grow up without any worries. They would not be able to come into contact with such matters. After closing his eyes and thinking for a while on the bed, Jianshan finally decided to wait until the next day to ask his mother. He felt that he needed to know what kind of world this was. After thinking through this point, Jianshan slowly opened his eyes and got off the bed. Tonight, he did not sit on the bed to cultivate as usual. Instead, he stood straight in the middle of the room with his eyes slightly closed. In Jianshan's mind, a set of very profound footwork gradually appeared. Then, a scene suddenly appeared in Jianshan's mind. The scene was like a movie that constantly flowed. He saw a young man wearing a white robe and carrying a long sword on his back using profound footwork. The young man's speed was very fast. If it was a normal person, they would not be able to see the young man's figure clearly. This was because the young man's speed was just too fast. Although he was only moving in a small space, there was a series of faint afterimages behind him. This young man was Jianshan's previous life. This set of footwork was recorded in the Azulate Sword Manual. It was very profound. When the moonlight from the horizon shone into the room through the cracks in the window, Jianshan, who was standing in the middle of the room, suddenly opened his eyes. At this moment he finally moved. His legs were moving at an unbelievable speed, almost forming a series of afterimages. Even some people who had practiced martial arts would not be able to maintain such a high speed with their legs. Jianshan's legs carried a profound and rhythmic path as he constantly stepped on the ground. As he moved at high speed, his body also moved at an extremely fast speed through the room. His speed was so fast that it created a whirlwind in the room. However, this scene did not last for very long. Jianchen quickly stopped. At this moment, his face was slightly pale and he was panting slightly. His legs could not help but tremble slightly. Jianchen slowly walked to the window and sat down. He bent down and used his hands to massage his legs. The profound footwork only lasted for a short while. Jianchen's legs were incomparably soft, and he felt as if he could no longer exert any strength. Jianchen helplessly shook his head. No matter what kind of martial arts one practiced, the first thing one needed to do was to train their muscles and bones. This saying was indeed true. The more profound the martial arts, the higher the requirements. Just like the set of steps he had just performed, if he didn't have a strong body and powerful Zhenqi to support it, he wouldn't have been able to maintain it for long. After all, a normal body wouldn't be able to display such speed, and once the speed exceeded the body's limits, it would cause some damage to the body. It was not that easy to train a profound martial art. Jianchen sat on the edge of the bed and stretched his legs. After his legs returned to normal, he sat cross-legged on the bed and once again entered the state of absorbing the heaven and earth spiritual qi to refine his body. The night passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, the sky was already bright. At this time, a voice came from outside Jianchen's room. "Fourth young master, it's daybreak. It's time to get up." Listening to the voice, it was obviously a girl's voice. Hearing this, Jianchen, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, slowly opened his eyes. He used a childish voice and said, "I know, Sister Honghua. I'm already up." Saying this, Jianchen got up from the bed. Chapter 5. Sister Honghua, Sister Dongmei, thank you for your hard work, Jianchen said softly as he looked at the two girls who were about 18 years old. The two girls were maids in Changyang Prefecture. They were dedicated to serving Jianchen's daily affairs. After Jianchen lived alone in a room, his mother, Bai Yuntian, specially sent these two maids to serve Jianchen. Hearing Jianchen's words, the two maids smiled sweetly. One of them said, "Fourth young master, you don't have to be so polite. As maids, this is what we should do." "That's right, fourth young master. You can't say that in the future. If the steward hears you, we'll be severely punished," another maid said. Jianchen smiled and said, "Don't worry, I won't say this in front of outsiders." Jianchen also understood that the concept of hierarchy in Changyang Prefecture was very strong. As the fourth young master of Changyang Prefecture, if this sentence was heard by outsiders, the two maids might really be punished. After washing up, Jianchen left his room and walked to his mother's room as usual. His mother's room was not far from his, only a short distance of more than 20 meters. As soon as he entered the room, Jianchen saw his mother dressing up at the dressing table. Beside her, there were two maids waiting on her. "Xiang, why are you here so early today?" As soon as she saw Jianchen, Bai Yuntian's face showed a gentle smile. She looked at Jianchen with doting eyes. Looking at the doting look in Bai Yuntian's eyes, Jianchen's heart completely softened. In his previous life, Jianchen lost his parents when he was young. He didn't know what a mother's love was and had never experienced it. However, since he came here, he truly felt the power of a mother's love. At the same time, in Jianchen's heart, he faintly cherished this hard-won mother's love. Jianchen came to Bai Yuntian and reached out to touch his stomach. He smiled embarrassedly and said, "I'm hungry." After last night's exercise, Jianchen's stomach was now a little hungry. Bai Yuntian reached out to touch Jianchen's head and said with a smile, "Then come with me to the dining hall to eat later." But Jianchen nodded slightly, a look of satisfaction on his face. In his heart, he enjoyed this mother's love. After a pause, Jianchen opened his mouth again and called, "Mother." Bai Yuntian looked at Jianchen with a gentle gaze and said softly, "Xiang, if you have something to say, just say it." Jianchen hesitated for a moment and sorted out the thoughts in his mind. Then he looked at Bai Yuntian and said, "Mother, can you tell me what the outside world is like?" Hearing this, Bai Yuntian was obviously stunned. Then she said, "Xiang, Are you interested in the outside world? I'm just curious. Jianchen said. Bai Yuntian smiled slightly and said, Xiang, the outside world is very vast and very complicated. It can't be explained in a few words. If you want to know what the outside world is like, it's best to go to the library and read some books. Saying this, Bai Yuntian looked helpless and said, But Xiang, you don't know how to read. Even if you go to the library, you won't be able to recognize a single word written in the books. Mother, then why don't you send someone to teach me how to read? Jianchen's tone was faintly a little dissatisfied. Hearing this, Bai Yuntan laughed and said, Xiang, you're only 2 years old now. A 2-year-old child starting to learn how to read. Mother has never heard of this matter. Moreover, in our Tianyuan continent, such a thing has never happened. Generally speaking, even the earliest children who start to learn how to read have to wait until they are 4 or 5 years old. Jianchen suddenly understood and said, Mother, I want to learn how to read now. Can you find someone to teach me? Hearing this, Bai Yuntian suddenly froze for a moment. Then she revealed a happy smile and said, Xiang, learning how to read is a very difficult thing. It's also very boring. You should know that there are many languages on our continent. It's impossible to learn all of them in a short time. Are you sure you want to start learning how to read now? Jianchen nodded affirmatively and said, Yes. Receiving Jianchen's affirmation, the smile on Bai Yuntian's face became even more brilliant. She happily said, Since Xiang took the initiative to ask, then Mother will support you very much. Saying this, Bai Yuntan slightly turned her head and said, Xiao Lu. Later, go invite the most famous teacher in Lore City to the mansion. Let him teach me, Xiang, how to read. Yes, madam. The maid who was helping Bai Yuntian comb her hair respectfully replied. Xiang, it's getting late. Let's go to the dining hall. Don't starve yourself. The day quickly passed by. Early the next morning, the teacher that Jianchen's mother, Bai Yuntian, invited for him came to the mansion early and began to teach Jianchen knowledge. From then on, Jianchen spent almost all of his time during the day seriously learning how to read. Because Jianchen retained the memories of his previous life, his mind was strong. Therefore, it wasn't difficult for him to recognize the words of this new continent. Especially under the careful guidance of someone, it became even easier. Moreover, he had an almost photographic memory, so his learning progress was very fast. In just 3 months, he had completely learned all of the common words of the continent. The speed at which Jianchen learned the language made the teacher sigh in amazement. When his mother, Bai Yuntian, found out that Jianchen had actually managed to learn the language in a short 3 months, she couldn't believe it. In the end, she had to personally test herself before she accepted this fact. After all, if one wanted to learn all the common languages on the continent, according to the normal speed, it would take at least 1 or 2 years, or even more. Yet Jianchen had managed to complete the homework that would take others 1 or 2 years to complete in a short 3 months. Without a genius's intelligence, it was simply impossible to accomplish this. This matter was quickly found out by Jianchen's father, Changyangba. Changyangba even personally came to Jianchen's room to visit him. Xiang, you have worked hard during this period of time. Next, you should relax. Father can also give you a reward. As the reward for your hard work in learning these few months, I don't know what reward Xiang would like. Changyangba looked at Jianchen with a smile and said softly. Having such a genius son, he felt very proud in his heart. Naturally, he was more concerned about Jianchen. Hearing this, Jianchen's eyes lit up. Without hesitation, he opened his mouth and said, Father, why don't you let me go to the library to read some books? At the same time, I can also increase my knowledge. Changyangba's eyes lit up. Looking at Jianchen's eyes with a trace of gratification, he laughed and said, Of course, this is not a problem. Xiang, you have such a motivated heart. Father is also happy for you. Now, I approve, you can freely enter the library in the future. Thank you, Father. Jianchen's face also showed a trace of a happy smile. Being able to enter the library, for Jianchen, was also a matter worth being happy about. After all, during this period of time, he slowly understood that the book collection pavilion wasn't a place that anyone could casually enter. Only direct descendants who were 6 years old and above had the qualifications to enter. Of course, if they had the permission of the patriarch, then it didn't count. After that, Chang Yongba asked about Jianchen's well-being and left here. When Chang Yongba left, Jianchen could not sit still. He immediately went out of the room and walked towards the library. After all, in these 3 months, he worked hard to learn how to read. Everything was just to be able to enter the library to read detailed books about this world. Although there were some information about this world, Jianchen could also ask his mother. After all, the records in books were more detailed and comprehensive. Therefore, Jianchen valued these books so much. Jianchen had already inquired about the location of the library. It was in a tall tower in the family's backyard. When Jianchen stepped into the backyard, he immediately felt that there were a large number of experts hidden in the surroundings. Pairs of eyes like poisonous snakes fell on him one after another. Jianchen held his head high and walked towards the tall tower in front of him as if he did not feel anything. If people knew that he could feel the gazes of those hidden in the dark, he was afraid that it would immediately bring him a series of troubles. After all, his current appearance was only that of a 2-year-old child, and he did not know the slightest bit of martial arts. Although there were many direct descendants in Changyang Prefecture, there were very few people coming and going to the library. Therefore, Jianchen did not see anyone else along the way except for a few guards in charge of standing guard. Soon he arrived at the sect of the tall tower. Jianchen stopped and raised his head slightly. He saw that there was a very large plaque hanging on the entrance of the tower. On it, there were 3 large words written in bold calligraphy: Library. In front of the entrance, there were 2 guards guarding. However, Jianchen could tell that these guards were not weak at a glance. Jianchen walked straight to the entrance of the tower. He pushed the door open and directly walked in. The 2 guards standing guard at the entrance did not stop him. They were like wooden carvings, standing there straight and motionless. When they saw Jianchen, they did not even greet him. When Jianchen entered the tower, he was greeted by a long corridor. At this moment, it was clearly daytime outside and the sun was shining brightly. However, in the corridor, it was incomparably dark. On the walls on both sides of the corridor, there were fist-sized luminous pearls hanging at intervals to provide light. This corridor was very long. It was estimated that it ran through the entire tower and divided the tower into 2 areas. When Jianchen came to the end of the corridor, he encountered 2 forks. "Fourth young master, the family head has ordered that you have the authority to enter the left area." At this moment, an old voice sounded. Following the voice, a tall figure gradually emerged from the darkness. Hearing the voice, Jianchen subconsciously turned his head to look. Although the light here was very dim, he could clearly see the appearance of the person in the darkness. He saw that it was a very old man with a head full of white hair. His old face was covered with wrinkles. He wore an old gray robe and his eyes were ordinary. He gave people the impression that he was a very ordinary old man. Chapter 6. Although Jianchen had sensed the old man's strength, he did not reveal anything on his face. He silently nodded and gently acknowledged the old man's words. Afterward, he passed by the old man and made his way to the corridor on the left. When he arrived at the end of the corridor, the light before Jianchen's eyes suddenly brightened. He had already arrived in an extremely spacious room. The light there was extremely bright, no different from the daytime outside. There were many neatly arranged bookshelves in the room. A large number of books were placed on them. If all the books in the room were added together, there would probably be over 1,000 books. Jianchen raised his head slightly to look at the ceiling. He knew that the reason why the light was so bright was all because of the ceiling. He did not know what the ceiling was made of, but it actually gave off a gentle light. Although the light was intense, it was not blinding. Although he was extremely curious about the ceiling, Jianchen did not waste any time on it. He directly arrived beside a bookshelf and carefully selected a book. In the end, he took out the book he needed the most and began to read it. The book clearly recorded the description of the entire continent. It was not thick, so Jianchen finished reading it in 6 hours. At the same time, he gained a rough understanding of this foreign world. This continent was known as the Tianyuan continent. It was extremely vast and contained countless countries of various sizes. Within the territories of these countries, there was a large number of people. There were all kinds of cities of different sizes. The largest of these cities were called super main cities. Each of these super main cities was very large, and the highest ruler of these cities was the city lord. They had millions or even tens of millions of city guards. However, there were only a total of 7 capital cities on the Tianyuan continent. They were controlled by the 3 most powerful empires. The Karl Empire and the Felicity Empire each controlled 2 capital cities, while the Holy Emperor Empire controlled 3 capital cities. Below the super main cities were the royal cities. However, royal cities were much smaller than super main cities, and they were much more numerous. Almost every kingdom had at least one royal city with over 1 million city guards. Below the royal cities were the first-class cities with 800,000 city guards, second-class cities with 400,000 city guards, third-class cities with 200,000 city guards, and third-class cities with 100,000 city guards. Below the third-class cities were the towns with 100,000 city guards. Below the towns were the villages of various sizes, and the city guards were all formed by the villagers themselves. However, the total number of soldiers in each village did not exceed 50,000, and their strength and equipment were also much weaker. Everyone on the Tianyuan continent cultivated a type of energy called Saint Force. When their Saint Force reached the 10th grade, it would condense into a Saint weapon according to their master's thoughts. Saint weapons came in all sorts of shapes, and their specific shape was completely based on their master's thoughts. Since Saint weapons were completely condensed from the Saint Force within a person's body, they were connected to their master's mind once they were formed. As for those with outstanding talent, the moment their Saint weapons were formed, they would possess certain attributes. These attributes were earth, wind, water, fire, light, and darkness. Among them, the light and darkness elements were extremely rare, and at the same time, extremely powerful. Light elements possessed extremely powerful healing abilities, and people who possessed light elemental Saint weapons were known as undying people on the Tianyuan continent. This was because once they were injured in battle, they would quickly recover through their healing abilities. If they were not killed in a single strike in a battle of the same level, it would be very difficult to kill them. Darkness elements possessed powerful corrosive properties. Not only were they extremely troublesome to deal with, they were also the most troublesome people to deal with. In particular, in the night, they would come and go without a trace. They were known as the kings of the night on the continent. The night was their world. The other 4 elements also possessed their corresponding abilities. The strength of the abilities depended on the user's strength. Of course, on the Tianyuan continent, less than 1 in 10 people possessed elemental Saint weapons. There were even more people who possessed Saint weapons that did not possess any elemental Saint weapons. In a battle of the same level, people who possessed elemental Saint weapons would often be much more powerful than people who did not possess any elemental Saint weapons. Saint weapons were the most powerful weapons of every person. During battle, they could instantly summon the Saint weapon from their body to assist their master in battle, allowing the master to unleash their greatest strength. At the same time, the Saint weapon was connected to the master's life. Once the Saint weapon suffered any great damage, it would also cause some damage to the master. If the Saint weapon was broken, the master would also suffer a fatal blow. In severe cases, the master could even die. However, Saint weapons were extremely tough. Unless someone was several times stronger than the master, they would not be able to cause any damage to the Saint weapon. After the Saint weapon was formed, the method of cultivation in the future was to absorb the spiritual energy of the world to make the Saint weapon even more powerful, thus increasing the user's strength. After the Saint weapon was formed, one would become a saint. On the Tianyuan continent, the strength of a saint was divided into 9 levels: Saint, Great Saint, Saint Master, Great Saint Master, Earth Saint Master, Heaven Saint Master, Saint Ruler, Holy Emperor, and Holy Emperor. Every level was further divided into 3 sub-levels: early, mid, and late. On the Tianyuan continent, there was a huge mountain range that practically traversed the entire continent. This mountain range was called the Magical Beast Mountain Range. There were countless magical beasts within, and the deeper one went, the more powerful the magical beasts became. The magical beasts were divided into a total of 9 levels. A level 1 magical beast was equivalent to a human saint, a level 2 magical beast was equivalent to a human great saint, and so on. A level 8 magical beast was equivalent to a human holy emperor, and a level 9 magical beast was equivalent to a human holy emperor. At the same time, there was an extremely popular occupation on the Tianyuan continent, and that was being a mercenary. According to the books, there were many mercenaries on the Tianyuan continent. They practically covered the entire continent. These mercenaries usually earned money by completing various missions. However, even more mercenaries entered the Magical Beast Mountain range to hunt magical beasts and obtain monster cores to earn money. Although the danger was very great, the profit was also very great. This was because the price of a monster core was very high in the Tianyuan continent. The higher the level of the monster core, the more expensive it would be. Some high-level monster cores could not even be measured by money. Monster cores were items that almost everyone on the Tianyuan continent needed. Monster cores contained extremely pure and powerful energy. This kind of energy could be directly absorbed to rapidly increase one's strength. It was several times faster than absorbing the chi of the world to cultivate. However, using monster cores to cultivate was not something that ordinary people could afford. In addition to this, Xianxia also understood from the books that this world was extremely cruel. There were battles almost everywhere. It was much more dangerous than the Jianghu in his previous life. If one did not have great strength, it would be very difficult to survive in the outside world. Moreover, everyone on this continent cultivated. However, there were many people with mediocre talent who could not cultivate the saint force in their body to the 10th layer in their entire life. From there, they could condense a saint weapon within their body. If these people did not have any backing, they would often live at the lowest level of the Tianyuan continent. They were equivalent to farmers in poor villages. After reading all this information, Xianxia finally had some understanding of this foreign world. Saint weapons, elemental energy, magical beasts, monster cores, and mercenaries. All of this was so new to Xianxia. At the same time, Xianxia's heart began to surge. This was a yearning for the outside world. He could not wait to immediately leave Changyang Prefecture and explore the outside world. However, Xianxia knew that at least for the next few years, he would not be able to achieve this wish. Not to mention that his parents would not allow a child who was not even 3 years old to go out and explore the outside world. Even if he really did go out, he would not have the ability to protect himself. P.S. Actually, saint weapons are very similar to a cultivator's life-bound magic treasure. Everyone can understand it this way. In the following period of time, Xianxia cultivated even more diligently. Aside from eating and doing some daily activities, he basically locked himself in his room to cultivate. Currently, he had not completed the most basic part of the first stage of the Azure Sword Codex, so the chi of heaven and earth that he had absorbed into his body had all fused into every cell in his body, including his organs, limbs, and bones, strengthening every part of his body. When his body reached a point where the chi of heaven and earth could no longer strengthen him, Xianxia would then proceed to the second step, which was to cultivate his Zhen Qi. So until now, other than possessing a physique that was far stronger than normal people, Xianxia's Dantian was completely empty. There was not the slightest bit of Zhen Qi. In his previous life, Xianxia only took a year to complete the first step of the Azure Sword Codex. But in this world, the chi of heaven and earth was many times stronger than in his previous life. So even though he had not completed it in 2 years, in terms of the strength of his body, it was definitely much stronger than in his previous life. Regarding Xianxia hiding in his room all day and not coming out, his parents did not reveal the slightest bit of strange expression. This was because in Changyang Prefecture, every child who had just turned 2 years old would be taught a basic breathing technique orally by their parents. Then they would be allowed to cultivate for a year. When they turned 3 years old, they would undergo the Saint Force test. This was used to evaluate their potential and aptitude. Similarly, when Jianxin had just turned 2 years old, his mother, Bai Yuntian, had also orally taught him the most basic breathing technique. However, regarding this breathing technique, Jianxin had directly thrown it to the back of his mind. This was because to him, this thing was no different from an adult playing with a child's toy. Therefore, when Jianxin shut himself in his room all day and did not come out, outsiders would think that Jianxin was cultivating the breathing technique and did not have any suspicions in their hearts. The next morning, Jianxin ended a night of cultivation. Today was his special day because today was his 3rd birthday. At the same time, today he would undergo the Saint Force test that every 3-year-old child in the Tianyuan continent had to undergo. After accompanying his mother, Bai Yuntian, to the dining hall for breakfast, Jianxin was led by his mother to the conference hall of Changyang Prefecture. Changyang Prefecture occupied a very large area. The area where Jianxin lived was only a small courtyard in Changyang Prefecture. Walking on the road, Jianxin constantly looked at Changyang Prefecture. In the past 3 years, Jianxin had spent most of his time in his room diligently cultivating. He rarely walked around Changyang Prefecture. In Changyang Prefecture, groups of armored guards shuttled back and forth in every area patrolling. A pair of bright eyes constantly swept back and forth in secret places. Even though it was daytime, they still did not relax at all. When Jianxin passed by a wide martial arts practice field, he was attracted by the sound of a young child shouting. He saw dozens of children under the age of 10 practicing martial arts under the guidance of a middle-aged man. Jianxin knew that these children were the direct descendants of Changyang Prefecture. There were more than 1,000 people in Changyang Prefecture. Other than half of them being the family guards and servants, the other half were the direct descendants of Changyang Prefecture. After passing through the martial arts practice field, Jianxin finally arrived at the conference hall in the center of Changyang Prefecture under the guidance of his mother, Bai Yuntian. Chapter 7. The hall was extremely spacious, and the space inside was even larger. At this moment, there were already a dozen or so people sitting in the hall. They were all middle-aged men in different attire. Bai Yuntian brought Jianxin to a seat near the main seat and sat down. In order to have a seat here, one had to have a certain status. Although Jianxin was the 4th young master of Changyang Prefecture, he did not have a seat here yet. So, Jianxin and his mother, Bai Yuntian, sat in the same seat. Jianxin obediently sat beside his mother, Bai Yuntian, and quietly waited without saying anything. Very soon, people entered the hall one after another. They found their own seats and sat down quietly. Among them, even Jianxin's 3 aunts brought their children in. 4th brother, today is the day of your Saint Force test. You have to work hard too. Don't disappoint your 2nd sister. Changyang Mingyue's cute face was filled with smiles as she spoke to Jianxin in a very soft tone. Although his voice was very soft, in this quiet hall, everyone could hear it clearly. Mingyue. Changyang Mingyue's mother frowned as she looked at her. Her tone was slightly reproachful. Changyang Mingyue gently smiled and stuck out her tongue at Jianxin in a cute manner. She did not say anything else, sitting quietly beside her mother. Her bright eyes flickered as she constantly studied the people in the hall. Very soon, the hall was filled with people. Everyone in the hall glanced at Jianxin from time to time. Their eyes were filled with anticipation. This time, they had all gathered together because today was the day Jianxin would take the Saint Force test when he turned 3. If it were a normal direct disciple, they would not have gathered so many people for the Saint Force test. However, Jianxin's status was different. He was the child of the head of Changyang Prefecture. Adding on the fact that he was extremely talented since young, almost everyone in Changyang Prefecture had high expectations for him. As a result, when Jianxin took the Saint Force test, these people with some status in Changyang Prefecture would naturally pay close attention. After all, Today's Saint Force test would be a very important starting point for how great Jianxin's future achievements would be. After everyone had gathered, Jianxin's father, Changyangba, finally entered the hall. He walked up to the throne that represented the head of the family and sat down boldly. Changyangba's gaze paused on Jianxin for a while. A faint smile hung on his face. He then looked around and after a few pleasantries, Jianxin's Saint Force test began very quickly. "Uncle Da, I'll have to trouble you to conduct the Saint Force test for my son," Changyangba said politely to an old man sitting below him. The old man seemed to be in his 60s or 70s. He wore gray clothes and had a head full of white hair. His face was filled with wrinkles, but his eyes were bright. The old man smiled and said, "You're too polite, head of the family." As he said that, the old man stood up and walked to the center of the hall. He looked at Jianxin with a smile and said in a kind tone, "Fourth young master, please." Bai Yuntian looked at Jianxin who was sitting beside her with a face full of love. Her voice was gentle as she said, "Xianxia, be good. Go to Uncle Da and let him test the Saint Force in your body." But Jianxin replied softly and left his seat obediently. He walked with small steps to the old man who was called Uncle Da. Uncle Da did not waste any time and slowly raised his right hand. Then, the silver-white ring on his right hand suddenly lit up with a white light. Uncle Da gently waved his right hand and there was a soft vibration from the ground. Then, on the empty ground, a half-meter tall white stone appeared without any warning. The white stone had clearly been polished. It was rectangular in shape and was half a meter tall. Its thickness and width were both about a foot. Looking at the white stone that had suddenly appeared, Jianxin blinked his eyes. He felt that the sudden appearance of the white stone was very strange. Then, Jianxin's gaze moved to Uncle Da's right hand and stared straight at the silver-white ring on his middle finger. A piece of information that he had read in a book quickly appeared in his mind. Space rings were made from extremely special and rare materials. The space within the ring varied in size. The smallest was only a meter in size while the largest could even reach 100 meters in size. Any inanimate object could be stored inside and it was an extremely expensive item on the Tianyuan continent. It was impossible for ordinary people to possess one. Noticing Jianxin's gaze on the space ring on his finger, Uncle Da smiled. Almost every person who saw him take out the Saint Force testing Saint Stone from his space ring would look at him the same way. Uncle Da had seen this gaze countless times already. "Fourth young master, please place your hand on the Saint Stone," Uncle Da said with a smile. The Saint Stone was a special stone that could test the strength and element of Saint Force within a person. It was extremely widespread on the Tianyuan continent and was the only tool used to test a person's strength. The results of the Saint Stone's test were represented by the colors of the light, which were red, orange, yellow, green, azure, blue, and violet. Red represented the strength of those below Saint Realm, orange represented Saint Realm, yellow represented Great Saint Realm, and so on. Blue represented Earth's Saint Masters, while violet represented Heaven's Saint Masters. As for Saint Rulers above Heaven's Saint Masters, such as the Holy Emperor and Holy Emperor, their strength could not be measured by the Saint Stone. With that, Jianxin looked away and extended his hand, placing it on the white stone known as the Saint Stone. At that moment, everyone's gazes gathered on the white Saint Stone. They could not help but look forward to it. They wondered just how much potential Jianxin had since he was young. When Jianxin placed his hand on the Saint Stone, Uncle Da also extended his hand and placed it on the Saint Stone. He used a special method to activate the Saint Stone. Immediately, Jianxin felt a strange energy surge out of the Saint Stone and enter his body through his arm. The strange energy was extremely gentle. After circulating through his body once, it returned to the Saint Stone through his arm. Uncle Da's old eyes stared at the change of the Saint Stone. But after a while, the Saint Stone still looked the same. There was no change at all. How is this possible? The Saint Stone did not react at all. Uncle Da could not help but exclaim. His smile gradually disappeared and was replaced by a stern expression. His gaze toward Jianxin was extremely strange. He was in slight disbelief. Noticing the expression on Uncle Da's face and the motionless Saint Stone, Everyone in the hall seemed to have realized something. Their expressions couldn't help but change slightly as they looked at each other. Everyone's eyes were filled with bewilderment. There were even a few people who sighed softly, revealing a trace of pity. Chang Yongba's expression gradually turned ugly. Bai Yuntian's face also slowly paled. Her expression was filled with disbelief. Uncle De took a deep breath. He could not believe this result. He activated the Saint Stone again, but the result was the same. The Saint Stone did not react at all. Uncle De also could not believe this result. The fourth young master, who had been called a genius since he was young, was actually a cripple who could not cultivate. Uncle De sighed in disappointment. He looked at the calm Jianchen with a complicated expression. He then turned to Chang Yongba and said, "Patriarch, after testing, it has been determined that the fourth young master is unable to cultivate the Saint Force." When she heard this announcement, Bai Yuntian's face had already turned incomparably pale, without a trace of blood. She stared blankly at Jianchen and muttered, "Impossible, impossible, how can Xiang be a cripple?" After muttering a few times, Bai Yuntian felt dizzy. Finally, her head tilted and she fainted on the chair. She could not accept that her son, who had always been called a genius, was actually a cripple. No mother could accept such a result, let alone someone who lived in a large family. Hearing this result, everyone in the hall sighed helplessly. They looked at Jianchen with eyes full of regret and disappointment. Jianchen's third aunt Yu Fengyan and first aunt Ling Long could not help but sigh in relief. They looked at Jianchen and Bai Yuntian with eyes full of schadenfreude. "Ah, fourth sister, what happened to you? Fourth sister, wake up, fourth sister, wake up." At this time, Bai Yushuang, who was sitting beside Bai Yuntian, noticed that Bai Yuntian had fainted and shouted anxiously. Hearing Bai Yushuang's shout, Chang Yongba immediately noticed the unconscious Bai Yuntian. Sighing slightly, Chang Yongba waved his hand and said, "Shuang, help Yun'er to rest." Jianchen also quickly walked to Bai Yuntian's side. Without anyone noticing, he gently pressed his right hand on Bai Yuntian's wrist. After testing Bai Yuntian's pulse, Jianchen confirmed that there was not much problem with Bai Yuntian. Jianchen looked at everyone in the hall and his disappointed father. He felt very helpless and secretly sighed. Then, Jianchen followed Bai Yushuang, who was holding his mother, out of the hall. Alas! After Jianchen left, Chang Yongba sighed heavily. His face was full of disappointment. Originally, he had high expectations for his fourth son, Jianchen, but he did not expect that the higher the expectations, the greater the disappointment. In the end, his fourth son, Changyang Shoten, was actually a cripple who could not cultivate. "Patriarch, you don't have to worry too much. Although fourth young master is unable to cultivate, he may have outstanding talent in other aspects." A middle-aged man sitting next to him comforted. Chang Yongba waved his hand and said sadly, "Let's not talk about this matter anymore. Everyone is dismissed." With that, Chang Yongba got up and left. Although he knew that his fourth son may have outstanding talent in other aspects, the most important thing in this world was still martial strength. After all, martial strength was the foundation of everything. The news that Changyang Prefecture's fourth son, Changyang Shoten, was a cripple quickly spread to every corner of Changyang Prefecture. Some people were happy about this matter, while others were sad. However, one thing was certain. From now on, Changyang Shoten's status in Changyang Prefecture would definitely decline rapidly. Chapter 8. Looking at the silent Jianchen with his head lowered, Changyang Mingyue blinked her large eyes. She then walked to Jianchen's side and said, "Fourth brother, don't be too sad. If anyone bullies you in the future, just tell me and I'll beat them up for you." Changyang Mingyue thought that Jianchen was sad because he could not cultivate Saint Force. Hearing that, Jianchen could not help but smile. He raised his head and looked at Changyang Mingyue. He said, "Don't worry, second sister. I'm not that easy to bully." Only Jianchen himself understood that it was not that he could not cultivate Saint Force, but that he had absorbed all the Saint Force into his body to refine it. As a result, his body was still empty. There was not a single bit of Saint Force in his dantian. Otherwise, the results of today's test would not have been like this. It was a pity that Jianshan could not tell anyone about this. Once he did, he would not be able to explain it at all. He would not tell anyone about the Azulate sword law no matter what. Otherwise, the origin of the cultivation method would become a huge problem. Although Jianshan understood that this matter would cause his status in Changyang Prefecture to drop drastically, he did not care about this. In fact, he even hoped that this would happen. Once things really developed like this, it would be much easier for him to leave Changyang Prefecture in the future. If he really became known as a genius, it would not be so easy for him to leave Changyang Prefecture in the future. At the very least, they would not allow him to leave before his strength was acknowledged. Xiang. A soft voice called out from the bed. At this moment, Jianshan's mother finally woke up. Hearing the voice, Jianshan's spirit was roused. He immediately turned around and went to Bai Yuntian's side. "Mother, your son is here. Are you all right?" Bai Yuntian looked at Jianshan with a complicated gaze. She sighed and said, "Mother is fine." Xiang, sigh. Bai Yuntian looked like she wanted to say something but stopped herself. She looked at Jianshan with a complicated gaze. There was sorrow, sadness, and a trace of pain. "Fourth sister, you don't have to worry too much. Xiangtian has been extremely intelligent since he was young. Although it's a great pity that he can't cultivate Saint Force, in my opinion, Xiangtian isn't that simple. His future is still limitless. After all, he has an intelligent mind that other children don't have." Bai Yushuang walked over to the bedside and comforted her. Bai Yuntian nodded and said, "I also understand this principle." She then looked at Jianshan and gently stroked Jianshan's head. She said softly, "Xiang, you don't have to be sad. Your second aunt is right. Although you can't cultivate Saint Force, you have a smart mind. Who knows, you might have outstanding achievements in other areas." Hearing this, a trace of hesitation appeared on Jianshan's face. Seeing his mother like this, Jianshan did not feel good. At this moment, he really wanted to tell his mother the truth and say that he was not a cripple who could not cultivate Saint Force. However, in the end, Jianshan held back and said, "Mother, don't worry. Your son will not disappoint you." Jianshan cherished this motherly love that was hard to come by. On this day, Jianshan stayed in the room with his mother all day and only left when night fell. During this time, Changyangba also came to visit Bai Yuntian, but he left very quickly. As for Jianshan, Changyangba's behavior today was completely different from before. His attitude towards Jianshan had gradually become colder. All of this was seen by Jianshan. In the blink of an eye, 4 years had passed since the day of Jianshan's Saint Force test. During this time, Jianshan would shut himself in his room to cultivate whenever he had nothing to do. The time he spent cultivating was even longer than before. Sometimes, Jianshan would not even be seen leaving his room for the entire day. In these 4 years, Jianshan's status in Changyang Prefecture had indeed dropped by a lot. Even Changyangba had become colder to him. In these 4 years, he had never taken the initiative to visit him even once. However, his mother, Bai Yuntian, came to visit Jianshan almost every day. Her love for Jianshan did not change at all. The next morning, Jianshan, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, slowly opened his eyes. After a night of cultivation, he stretched out his hands slightly. On his palms, a hazy white light gradually appeared. Then, Jianshan did a beautiful somersault in the air and landed steadily on the ground. At the same time, both of his hands were inserted into the ground. With a soft sound, Jianshan's small hands, which were as hard as 2 small steel plates, easily penetrated the extremely hard ground. Only the parts above his palms were exposed. Looking at his masterpiece, Jianshan's face revealed a joyful smile. Half a year after Jianshan's Saint Force test, he had already completed the first layer of the Azulate sword mantra. He had officially begun to cultivate Saint Force. Because he did not need to use the Saint Force he absorbed to refine his body, Jianshan's cultivation speed was extremely fast. In just a few years, he had already achieved great results. Now, with the Saint Force in his body, Jianshan could insert his hands into the hard ground of normal stone with ease. Early in the morning, Jianchen walked out of his room and wandered around Changyang Prefecture alone. However, the patrolling guards in the manor all looked at Jianchen with strange gazes. Some were mocking, some were disdainful, and some were regretful. The fact that Jianchen was a cultivation cripple was no longer a secret in Changyang Prefecture. Now, even some of the patrolling guards in Changyang Prefecture looked at Jianchen in a different light. Jianchen turned a blind eye to all of this. At this moment, his stomach couldn't bear the hunger and began to rumble. Jianchen reached out and rubbed his stomach. He sighed inwardly and then walked towards the kitchen. It had been a long time since he had gone to the dining hall with his mother. During this period of time, Jianchen would go to the kitchen to eat breakfast every morning. He would only go to the dining hall with his mother at noon and at night to eat with his aunts. When Jianchen arrived at the kitchen, over 100 workers were busy inside. The kitchen was filled with smoke. Because of the stove, staying inside was like being in a steaming steamer. Oh, isn't this the fourth young master? Why has the fourth young master come to our kitchen again? Sigh, this kitchen is for us servants. Fourth young master, with your delicate body, how can you come to a place like this? A worker who seemed to be in his 20s began to tease Jianchen as soon as he saw him. Everyone could tell that he was mocking Jianchen with a strange tone. As soon as this person's voice fell, another worker immediately said, "If my guess is correct, the fourth young master must have come to the kitchen to get some steamed buns. But it's strange. Why didn't the fourth young master go to the dining hall to eat with the family head? Instead, you have to suffer and actually come to the kitchen to get some steamed buns. These steamed buns are for us servants and guards to eat." The one who spoke was a young man in his 30s. He looked at Jianchen with a mocking expression. After listening to the two's words, the other workers in the kitchen looked at them with expressions of amusement. These two people had important people behind them. The worker in his 20s was introduced to them by Jianchen's aunt, who was also the first wife of Changyang Ba, Ling Long. It was said that he was related to Ling Long. However, because he didn't have much ability, he could only work in the kitchen. As for the young man in his 30s, his brother was the captain of the guards in Changyang Prefecture. Hearing the two's mocking words, Jianchen frowned slightly. A trace of anger flashed in his eyes. However, in the end he restrained himself and went straight to a huge steamer. Just as he was about to reach out to open the lid of the steamer, he didn't expect that a pair of large hands would be one step ahead of him and carry the huge steamer away. "I have to quickly distribute the steamed buns in this steamer to the guards. Those brothers who are in charge of the guards in Changyang Prefecture haven't eaten breakfast yet." As he spoke, the worker carried the steamer and walked out. At the same time, he muttered to himself, "What a pity. Fourth madam actually gave birth to such a useless son." Hearing this, Jianchen's body stiffened slightly. At this moment, the anger in his heart finally couldn't help but erupt. He didn't say a word. His body swayed slightly, and his feet lightly stepped on the ground. With an extremely fast speed, he arrived behind the worker carrying the steamer and directly punched him in the back. Bam! Caught off guard, the worker carrying the steamer stumbled and fell to the ground from Jianchen's punch. The steamer in his hands also fell to the ground. Immediately, round steamed buns fell out of the steamer and rolled around on the ground. This sudden turn of events stunned everyone in the kitchen. Looking at Jianchen, who had suddenly changed positions, everyone in the kitchen was in disbelief. They didn't even see how Jianchen had run over. What was even more unbelievable was that the 7-year-old fourth young master had actually knocked a 30-year-old man to the ground with a single punch. Even though the latter was carrying a large steamer, this scene was still inconceivable in the eyes of the workers. "Haha, Brother Chiu, you've really surprised me. No matter what, you're a third-layer Saint Force expert. You were actually knocked to the ground by a single punch from a child. Don't tell me you spent too much energy on that woman's stomach last night. You're actually so weak." Looking at the worker who had fallen to the ground, the 20-year-old man who had mocked Jianchen earlier couldn't help but laugh loudly. Hearing this, the worker called Chiu, crawled up from the ground awkwardly. His eyes were filled with anger as he glared at Jianchen. To be knocked to the ground by a 7-year-old child, especially a cripple who couldn't cultivate saint force, was a great humiliation to him. After all, although he wasn't a saint who had condensed a saint weapon, he was still someone who had reached the third layer of saint force. Blinded by anger, Chiao seemed to have forgotten that Jianshan was the fourth young master of Changyang Prefecture. With a roar, he quickly came in front of Jianshan and directly threw a punch at Jianshan's chest. Seeing Chiao's punch, a look of disdain appeared on Jianshan's face. To him, this punch was full of flaws. Then, Jianshan tilted his body slightly and took a small step to the side, just barely dodging Chiao's punch. He then jumped up and his right leg quickly drew a beautiful arc in the air as he kicked Chiao's nose. Ah! Chapter 9. Chiao glared at Jianshan furiously. His gaze was like that of a ferocious beast, as if he wanted to swallow Jianshan whole. "You little bastard, I'll definitely teach you a lesson today." Chiao roared furiously. He took 2 steps forward and approached Jianshan. He quickly kicked out, aiming for Jianshan's head. The kick was extremely fast. If it really did hit the head, it would definitely cause quite a bit of damage to an ordinary person. If it hit a normal child, it would definitely cause fatal damage. Sensing the strength of Chiao's kick, the young man who had mocked Jianshan earlier suddenly paled. He cried out, "Brother Chiao, stop." Jianshan was the fourth young master of the Changyang Prefecture after all. He was the child of the patriarch of the Changyang Prefecture. Although he was not valued by the clan because he was a cripple who could not cultivate saint force, his status was still there. Mocking him once or twice was fine, but if they attacked the fourth young master of the Changyang Prefecture, they would definitely be severely punished. Even if they had the support of others, it would not change anything. Sensing the strength of Chiao's kick, Jianshan's expression changed slightly. A cold light flashed through his eyes as he leaned slightly to the side, easily dodging the kick. At the same time, Jianshan did not retreat. Instead, he charged forward, quickly approaching Chiao. He used one of his arms to block Chiao's leg that had not been retracted yet while his other hand grabbed onto Chiao's other leg. With a deep roar, he lowered his waist and used all the saint force in his body. In the end, he actually used his weak body to lift Chiao's body that weighed over 100 kilograms. Lifting Chiao's body, Jianshan did not give Chiao any time to resist. He took a few steps forward and ran on the ground. Using the momentum, he threw Chiao out. Chiao's body flew a full 5 meters in the air before finally landing on a large table used for cutting vegetables. Coincidentally, the place where Chiao landed on was a strange hedgehog-like tool with steel spikes all over its body. Chiao's body just happened to be on top of this strange kitchen tool. The steel spikes that were over an inch long easily pierced his body. Immediately, Chiao let out a scream like a pig being slaughtered. The intense pain caused even his facial muscles to twist. All the workers in the kitchen were stunned. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. Not only was a 7-year-old child able to lift Chiao who weighed over 100 kilograms, he was also able to defeat Chiao who had reached the third layer of saint force. If this were to spread, no one in Changyang Prefecture would believe it. Jianshan looked coldly at the screaming Chiao and the other youth who was mocking him. He did not say anything and directly left the kitchen, not even taking the steamed buns. Outside, Jianshan sighed inwardly. He did not expect that the fourth young master of Changyang Prefecture would be bullied by the servants in the kitchen. Jianshan threw the gloominess in his heart to the back of his mind and walked around Changyang Prefecture with small steps. Changyang Prefecture was very large. At least, Jianshan had not explored all of Changyang Prefecture in the past few years. The scenery in the prefecture was also very good. There were pavilions and towers everywhere. There were even a few small lakes. In the gardens, there were many exotic flowers and plants that gave off a faint fragrance. As the fourth young master of Changyang Prefecture, Jianshan could wander around freely in Changyang Prefecture. Along the way, Jianshan discovered that there were some powerful people hiding in some of the important roads and buildings in the prefecture. Jianshan had already gotten used to this. After all, he knew that Changyang Prefecture was one of the 4 great clans in Lore City. In a first-class city like Lore City, they had a relatively high status. As he walked, Jianchen unknowingly arrived at a beautiful garden. In a spacious area, Jianchen actually discovered that his third brother, Changyang-ku, was practicing martial arts with a wooden axe in his hand. However, the way Changyang-ku swung the axe, in the eyes of a sword grandmaster like Jianchen, looked like he was just randomly chopping at the ground. There was not a single move to speak of. Although Jianchen specialized in the way of the sword, he had seen many experts who used axes and various weapons in his previous life. Therefore, Jianchen was somewhat familiar with the moves of various weapons. However, Changyang-ku's random chopping made Jianchen feel rather speechless. How was this practicing martial arts? Just as Jianchen was about to turn and leave, Changyang-ku suddenly discovered Jianchen. His hand movements suddenly stopped, and a sinister smile appeared on his face. "Fourth brother, come here. I'll give you some candy." Changyang-ku looked at Jianchen and shouted at him. Hearing Changyang-ku's words, Jianchen almost tripped and fell to the ground. He thought to himself, these words are more likely to be used to trick a 3-year-old child. However, Jianchen did not seem to realize that if he disregarded his past life, he was not much older than a 3-year-old child. Jianchen did not pay any attention to Changyang-ku's words. He did not stop walking and did not even look back as he walked away. Seeing Jianchen walk further and further away, a trace of anger appeared on Changyang-ku's face. He threw away the wooden axe in his hand and immediately chased after Jianchen, stopping him. "Fourth brother, didn't you hear me call out to you?" Changyang-ku blocked Jianchen's path and said angrily with a bulging mouth. "Do you need something?" Jianchen asked indifferently as he calmly looked at Changyang-ku. His voice was a little cold. Jianchen did not have a good impression of his third brother at all. In the past 2 years, Changyang-ku would always think of ways to bully Jianchen. Ever since the news of Jianchen not being able to cultivate Saint Force spread, Changyang-ku's actions became more and more excessive. If it were not for the fact that Jianchen rarely went out, Changyang-ku would probably have bullied Jianchen even more. However, Changyang-ku did not succeed even once. Instead, he was secretly bullied by Jianchen quite a few times, which made Changyang-ku hold a grudge against him. He always wanted to find an opportunity to take revenge. "Third brother, practice martial arts with your third brother." With that, Changyang-ku did not wait for Jianchen's agreement before grabbing Jianchen's arm and forcefully pulling him to where he had trained before. Inside, Changyang-ku was extremely excited. He could not beat Jianchen in terms of intelligence, but he did not believe that he was not Jianchen's opponent in terms of martial arts. After all, his fourth brother was a martial arts cripple. It was impossible for him to cultivate Saint Force, so he believed that winning was a good opportunity to bully Jianchen. Very soon, Jianchen was forcefully pulled to where he had trained before by Changyang-ku. Changyang-ku picked up the wooden axe that he had thrown to the side and looked at Jianchen with an evil smile. He said, "Fourth brother, are you ready? I'm about to attack." Seeing the feminine smile on Changyang-ku's face, Jianchen revealed a look of ridicule. He spread out his hands and said, "Third brother, you have a weapon in your hand. Do you want me to fight you empty-handed?" Hearing that, Changyang-ku was stunned. He looked at the wooden axe in his hand and hesitated slightly before tossing it to Jianchen. He said, "Fourth brother, you take the axe. I'll fight you empty-handed." Although the axe was made of wood, it still weighed around 5 kilograms. It would be quite difficult for an ordinary child who was not even 10 years old to lift it. Changyang-ku had seen this point, which was why he tossed it to Jianchen. He wanted to see him make a fool of himself. Jianchen caught the wooden axe and examined it. The craftsmanship of the axe was extremely crude. It only had the shape of an axe and the blade was not sharpened. Even if it struck him, he would not be injured. At most, he would feel a little pain. A sliver of surprise appeared in Changyang-ku's eyes when he saw Jianchen easily borrow the axe that weighed over 5 kilograms. This situation had exceeded his expectations. Jianchen looked at Changyang-ku and faintly smiled. He said, "Third brother, you should use this axe." With that, Jianchen tossed the axe back to Changyang-ku. Catching the axe that Jianchen tossed over, Changyang-ku asked in doubt, "Fourth brother, do you want to fight me without a weapon?" Xianxia gently chuckled and shook his head. Afterward, he arrived beside a small tree and broke off a meter-long branch. He removed all the leaves on it, leaving behind a bare branch. He returned it to its original position. "This is my weapon." Xianxia gently smiled as he waved the branch in his hand. Changyongku glanced at the chopstick-sized branch in Xianxia's hand. Not only was he not angry, he even smiled happily. In his opinion, defeating Xianxia today was becoming easier and easier. As soon as he thought about how he could finally bully his fourth brother who had caused him so much trouble, Changyongku became excited. Changyongku slowly tightened his grip on the axe and said, "Fourth brother, be careful. I'm going to attack." With that, Changyongku immediately charged forward and arrived before Xianxia. He gripped the axe tightly with both hands and viciously swung it at Xianxia. The wooden axe could not kill anyone at all, so Changyongku did not hold back at all. He struck with extreme force. Xianxia staggered and easily dodged Changyongku's axe. Afterward, he quickly stabbed out with the branch in his hand. The moment he stabbed out, Xianxia's presence suddenly changed. It became as sharp as a sword, and the branch in his hand seemed to possess an unstoppable force. At that moment, the ordinary branch seemed to have become a real sword in Xianxia's hand. Xianxia stabbed out with the branch extremely quickly, so fast that Changyongku did not even notice it. The branch had already stopped before Changyongku's throat. "Third brother, you've lost," Xianxia softly said as he looked at Changyongku, who still had not pulled back his axe in time, in a playful manner. Changyongku blankly stared at the branch that had stopped right in front of his throat. Disbelief filled his eyes. He did not see how the branch had arrived. All he saw was a blur, and the next thing he knew, the branch was right in front of his throat. After blanking out for a while, Changyongku suddenly returned to his senses. He extended his hand and snapped the branch in half. He loudly said in an unconvinced manner, "It doesn't count, it doesn't count. Fourth brother, you cheated." Xianxia looked at the slightly reddened Changyongku in amusement. He said in a strange tone, "Third brother, how did I cheat?" Changyongku scratched his head when he heard that. He stammered, unable to say anything. In the end, he snorted, "It doesn't count anyway. Let's do it again." Welcome to Legends of Cultivation audiobooks, where we bring ancient fantasy to life through storytelling. Follow the rise of heroes who defy fate, unlock mystical powers, and battle across celestial realms. Our audiobooks are crafted for fans of Chinese cultivation novels, filled with battles, breakthroughs, and legendary artifacts. Subscribe and be part of an unforgettable journey into the realm of immortality.